You wake up and you are Napoleon Bonaparte. Not a reincarnation, not a dream. You are actually him, in his body, in his world, with his wars, his enemies, and his impossible ambitions. And you only have 100 days before it all comes crashing down. Let's set the scene. The year is 1815. Napoleon has just escaped from the island of Elba, where he was exiled after losing to a coalition of European powers. He is back on French soil, and the entire continent is watching in disbelief. The moment his boots hit the ground in France, something extraordinary happens. Soldiers who were sent to arrest him drop their weapons and cheer. Entire regiments switch sides on the spot. The King of France flees Paris without even putting up a fight. And now that is you. You are riding into Paris on a wave of support that feels almost supernatural. The crowd is screaming your name. Flowers are being thrown. Grown men are weeping. And somewhere deep inside, you are absolutely terrified because you know how this story ends. But here is the thing. You are not just observing. You are in charge. Every decision that shaped these 100 days is now yours to make or change. You have his memories, his instincts, his charisma. But you also have something Napoleon never had. You know the future. So what do you do first? The Allies, meaning Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, have already declared Napoleon an outlaw and are mobilizing hundreds of thousands of troops against you. You have maybe 6 to 8 weeks before they are ready to invade. The clock is already running. Your army is enthusiastic, but not yet fully organized. You have around 280,000 men on paper, but many are scattered, poorly equipped, or still being called up. Your instinct, Napoleon's instinct, is to strike fast before the enemy can unite. Speed is your greatest weapon, and always has been. You spend the first few weeks reorganizing the army at a pace that shocks even your own generals. You personally review supply lines, artillery positions, troop movements. Napoleon was famous for working 18-hour days and barely sleeping, and now you understand why. There is simply that much to do. Meanwhile, you try something Napoleon never seriously tried: diplomacy. You send letters to the Allied monarchs explaining that you want peace, that France has no desire for war, that you are willing to accept the current borders of Europe. Every single letter is ignored. They have already made up their minds, so war it is. And here is where your knowledge of the future becomes both your greatest advantage and your greatest burden. You know that Napoleon marched into Belgium in June of 1815. You know about a little village called Waterloo, and you know that is where everything fell apart. The plan in history was to separate the British forces under Wellington from the Prussian forces under Blücher, defeat them one at a time before they could combine. It was a brilliant plan. The execution is what went wrong, and you, sitting in Napoleon's chair, are about to find out why. June 15th arrives. Your army crosses into Belgium in the dead of night. The movement is fast, surprisingly fast. The Allies are caught off guard. Blücher's Prussians are engaged at Ligny, and after a brutal battle, you crush them. It is a genuine victory. Napoleon also won this battle in history. But here is the problem. After Ligny, Napoleon historically sent Marshal Grouchy with 33,000 men to follow the Prussians and make sure they could not regroup. Grouchy followed orders too, literally, kept marching east, and never showed up when it actually mattered. You remember this, so you change the orders. You tell Grouchy to stay closer, to move toward the sound of cannon fire if he hears it, to use his own judgment. It seems like a small change, a few different words in a written order. But in history, those missing words cost Napoleon everything. You just rewrote them. June 18th, the Battle of Waterloo. Wellington's British and Allied forces are dug into a ridge south of the village. They are outnumbered, but Wellington is a defensive genius. He has chosen his ground carefully, and you know he is counting on the Prussians arriving in the afternoon to save him. Napoleon historically delayed the attack until late morning, waiting for the ground to dry from overnight rain so his artillery could move better. That delay gave the Prussians extra time to arrive. You wrestle with this decision yourself. Do you attack early on wet ground and risk your artillery? Or wait? You wait. Same as history. The ground really is too wet. Even knowing the outcome, you cannot change physics. The attack begins around midday. Your artillery opens up with a sound that shakes the earth. The battle is on, and everything now depends on whether your changed orders to Grouchy worked. The fighting is brutal beyond anything you expected, even knowing the history. These are not video game soldiers. These are real human beings, screaming and dying in the mud. The British squares hold formation under cavalry charges. Wellington rides calmly along his lines, and you watch from a ridge, feeling genuinely sick. Mid-afternoon. Your scouts report troops appearing on the eastern horizon. Your heart stops. In history, those troops were Prussians arriving to crush Napoleon's flank. But this time, something is different. The flags being reported are French. Grouchy has arrived. Your changed orders actually worked. The entire battle just shifted in an instant. What happens next unfolds like a controlled explosion. Grouchy hits the arriving Prussians from behind, while your main force hammers Wellington from the front. Wellington, who has held all day, suddenly has enemies on two sides. His famous cool begins to crack. Regiments that held for hours start pulling back under pressure. And then comes the moment. The Imperial Guard, Napoleon's most elite troops, the ones who historically retreated and triggered a full collapse, you hold them back longer this time. You wait until Wellington's line is already buckling, and then you send them in at exactly the right moment. The line breaks. Wellington orders a fighting retreat. He is professional enough to avoid total catastrophe. But it is undeniably a retreat. The Battle of Waterloo, which in real history ended Napoleon's reign forever, has just ended differently. You are still standing. France is still yours. And Europe is absolutely stunned. Word reaches Paris within days. The reaction is unlike anything you have ever seen. The streets erupt. Newspapers print victory editions. Your ministers, many of whom privately expected another defeat, suddenly become your most enthusiastic supporters. The politicians who were quietly planning your replacement are now loudly pledging their loyalty. But here's where it gets complicated. Winning Waterloo does not end the war. Austria and Russia have not even committed their full forces yet. There are still hundreds of thousands of Allied troops that were not at Waterloo. Winning one battle, even a massive one, does not mean winning everything. The Allied powers convene an emergency meeting. Britain is shaken but not broken. Wellington survived with much of his army intact. Prussia is badly hurt but still functional. Austria and Russia are watching and recalculating. The question now is whether they will negotiate or double down and invade France anyway. And here is the thing nobody talks about when they imagine being Napoleon. It is not the battles that are hardest. It is this. Sitting in a room full of brilliant, ambitious, calculating men and trying to hold together a coalition of your own marshals, ministers, and politicians who all want something different. You call a special council. Your marshals are there, Ney-Soult, Devout. Your foreign minister Fouché, who you know from history was already secretly in contact with the Allies and planning for your removal. You look at him across the table, and you know exactly what he has been doing behind your back. You do not confront him publicly. That would cause a scandal and distract from the moment. Instead, you quietly remove him from sensitive communications and have him watched. Napoleon historically trusted Fouché far too long. You will not make that mistake. Small changes again, but they matter more than any cannon. Negotiations begin. The Allies are reluctant, but after Waterloo they are not as confident as they were. Britain pushes for a peace that keeps Napoleon on the throne, but strips France of any territory gained during the Revolutionary Wars. It is humiliating, but you know the alternative is more war. Your marshals want to keep fighting. Ney especially, who has been fiercely loyal and is still full of fire after the victory, argues that you can beat them again if they invade, and maybe he is right. But you also know that Napoleon's downfall was always chasing one more battle instead of securing peace. You overrule them. Gently but firmly. You accept the framework for negotiation. France keeps its borders roughly as they were in 1792, which is actually not bad. You keep your throne. The Allies keep their dignity. Nobody is completely happy, which usually means the deal is actually fair. Day 70 of your 100 days. The preliminary peace agreement is signed in Brussels. It is not the glorious empire Napoleon once dreamed of. No domination of Europe. No puppet kings installed across the continent. Just France, intact and sovereign, led by a man the rest of Europe agreed to tolerate. Back in Paris, the public reaction is mixed. The soldiers celebrate. The common people celebrate. But the royalists are furious. The liberal politicians who supported your return but wanted a constitutional monarchy are nervous. They wanted Napoleon the reformer, not Napoleon the emperor. And you are starting to understand the difference matters enormously. You make a decision that the real Napoleon never made with any sincerity. You announce genuine constitutional reforms. A real parliament with real power. A free press within limits. An independent judiciary. Not because you believe in democracy exactly, but because you understand something Napoleon never fully grasped. You cannot fight everyone at once. The liberals in the assembly are suspicious at first. They have heard promises before, but you follow through. You actually show up to parliamentary sessions. You listen to debates. You allow criticism to be published. Within weeks, the political temperature in Paris drops noticeably. People start talking about stability instead of revolution. Meanwhile, your brother and other family members, who historically treated their kingdoms like personal playgrounds, are being quietly reined in. You send letters making very clear that family loyalty only goes so far, and that anyone embarrassing France will answer for it. The Bonaparte clan is not thrilled, but they fall in line. Day 80. Something unexpected happens. A delegation of European merchants and bankers arrives in Paris. Not politicians. Businessmen. They are tired of wars disrupting trade, and they want to meet the man who just won Waterloo and then chose peace anyway. It is the first moment you feel something shift in your favor beyond just military force. You meet with them for 3 hours. You talk about trade routes, currency stability, lowering tariffs, opening ports. Napoleon historically understood economics, but used it as a weapon. The continental system being a famous example that backfired badly. You try something different. You offer partnership instead of coercion. They leave impressed. Day 85. A letter arrives from Tsar Alexander of Russia. Private, not official. He writes that he is watching France with interest, and that he believes a stable France under firm leadership serves everyone's interest better than another decade of revolution. It is not friendship, but it is not hostility either. Progress. Your marshals remain restless. They are warriors without a war, and warriors without wars are always dangerous. You solve this problem the only way available to you. You give them impossible jobs, rebuilding infrastructure, reforming the military academy, reorganizing the National Guard. Keep them busy, give them purpose, drain their ambition into useful work. Day 90. A domestic crisis. Food prices in Paris spike after a poor harvest in the south. The crowds that cheered you 90 days ago are now gathering in the markets looking hungry and angry. History is full of emperors who survived wars only to fall to bread riots. You know this. You personally authorize emergency grain purchases from as far away as Poland. You order price controls on bread in Paris and Lyon and Marseille. You appear in public in working-class neighborhoods without the full imperial pageant, just a small escort, talking to shopkeepers and mothers and old veterans. The tension eases within days. Day 93. The formal peace treaty is signed in a ceremony in Paris. The Allied ambassadors look like men attending a funeral they cannot quite believe they are at. Wellington sends a private note acknowledging the outcome with characteristic understatement. Britain will honor the treaty. You breathe for the first time in weeks. Day 95. You sit alone in the palace at night, and you let yourself actually think about where you are. You arrived in this body 95 days ago, knowing only disaster lay ahead. You changed small things. A few words in an order. A decision to negotiate instead of push further. A letter answered differently. And it worked. Not perfectly. France is not dominant. You are not building an empire that stretches from Spain to Moscow. But France exists. It is whole. It is at peace. And for the first time in a generation, its people have something they barely remember the feeling of. A future that does not involve war. But you also know something sobering. You only had 100 days. What comes after day 100 is not guaranteed by anything you have done. History is not a script you rewrite once and then relax. The same pressures that destroyed Napoleon, the Allies wanting him gone, the internal politics, the endless ambition around him, they are all still there. The royalists will try to undermine you. The liberals will want more than you are willing to give. The army will always need a reason to stay loyal. The economy will always need managing. Being Napoleon is not a problem you solved. It is a problem you have to solve every single day without stopping. And yet, what you did in these 100 days is remarkable when you think about it honestly. You took one of the most catastrophic episodes in European history and turned it into something different. Not a fairy tale, not a perfect outcome, but a genuine second chance for a country that history had already condemned. The real Napoleon, the historical one, was a genius who could not stop. He won victory after victory, and then kept going until there was nothing left to win and everything to lose. His greatest flaw was never knowing when enough was enough. You had the advantage of knowing exactly where enough was. And that is the lesson that sits at the heart of these 100 days. It is not about being smarter than Napoleon or braver or more ruthless. It is about knowing when to stop, when to hold, when the battle in front of you is not the one that actually decides everything. So if you ever find yourself in a position like this, not as Napoleon obviously, but in your own life, remember what these 100 days taught. The knowledge of where things go wrong is only useful if you are willing to change course before you get there. That is the only power that ever truly matters.